so come back when I'm not here. That's an invitation. And you need a church family. Everyone needs one. I don't have anybody in the 21st century functions without one, and why they would want to. So I encourage you to come back here when I'm not here. You'll find the same kind of loving, gentle spirit, welcoming spirit that you found tonight. So thank you for coming. I am honored to be here. I spoke to a luncheon today, the Synod, and we had a wonderful time. Had a lot of really delightful folks, a lot of clergy in the area, including bishops, and what an honor it was for me. I will not forget it. And I won't forget this either. I'm delighted that you came. I'm going to kind of share a testimony tonight. As I mentioned this morning, if you are a follower of Christ, then you have a testimony. Everyone who has given their heart to Christ has a testimony. We all come from different directions to get there, for the most part. But our story may be the one that someone needs to hear. So that's why I encourage you to share your story of faith with other people. The stories of faith that people share with me is the reason I stand before you tonight. So I encourage that greatly. The stories actually contain a book that I wrote several years ago, which is a book that I wrote so I would never have to talk about it. And I don't know how I could have failed more miserably at that. It's a book about what happened to me 25 years ago on the way to church. And people seem to have embraced the book. My daughter called me, a couple of years ago, just very, very excited. She's easily excited. And she says, Dad, you're not going to believe what happened. I said, what happened? She said, you were on Jeopardy tonight. I said, you mean the game show Jeopardy? Yes. I said, I've never been on Jeopardy. They wouldn't have me on the show. I don't know the questions or the answers. She says, no, you're on Jeopardy. You need to see it. So I live in Houston, and I'm looking on the program schedule for television, and I find that Jeopardy is going to be on again that night at 11:30. So I'm watching Jeopardy at 11:30. It won't surprise you to know that's not something I often do. And about halfway through the show, I'm ready to turn it off because there's been nothing on there, and I'm certainly not on there. I'm looking at the show. So Alex Trebek says, and the next category is famous authors. And one of the contestants says, I'll take famous authors for $600. And on the big blue screen with the white letters, it said, Don Piper spent 90 minutes in this place. And I pushed the button and said, what is heaven? And won $600. So my life is a question of Jeopardy. My life is for sale at Walmart. I didn't count on that at all, so I'm kind of stunned by the response to the book. After we finish here this evening, I'll be very honored to assign books. I signed some earlier today. People had their books and brought them with them. And if you did, I'll be honored to sign your books. And if you don't, we have kind of a limited supply of the books that I have written. 4 books. This book, 90 Minutes in Heaven, is the first book. And we also have it in Spanish and large print. And I'm really happy to report that there's a children's version of the book, too. Children are no less interested in heaven because they have classmates who go there and grandparents who go there. And so they're very interested in it, too. So we wrote a version of the book, which is shorter, with more pictures, just for kids. And after this, I wrote 3 more books. One of them was a devotional book, very cleverly entitled Daily Devotionals, and 90 readings for hope and healing, and there are 90 stories in there. And then the third book I wrote is called Heaven is Real, Lessons on Earthly Joy. It actually is a book I deeply wanted to write for people going through a long, dark night. People who have experienced the loss. People who are going through some health issues, or they love someone who is. Sunday or Saturday, I will be in Atlanta at the memorial service for my co-author, Cecil Murphy's wife. Shirley, his wife of 57 years, passed away last week. And so he's kind of going through a difficult time. Cecil was a missionary to Kenya for 27 years. So they've had a long and wonderful life together. But he's going through a dark night just because of his loss. So that book, Heaven's Real Lessons on Earthly Joy, is a book for people who are trying to get over a bridge. Because my accident happened on a bridge. I was never the same on the other side of that bridge. So I think I mentioned this morning that the book's premise is this: if you know where you're going, you should be having a better trip on the way. And that's what it's about. And then the final book I released is a book called Getting to Heaven, Departing Instructions for Your Life Now. It is a teaching book about the words of Jesus about having a meaningful life on the way to heaven. And he did say that he came that we might have life abundantly. And let's face it, we don't always act like we are. That's what that book is about, getting to heaven. And I'll be glad to sign those afterwards. Right before Jesus died, and I think it's important for us to remember that he did, he gathered his followers one final time in a room upstairs in Jerusalem. I was talking to a good friend of mine in Florida this afternoon about a trip that we're planning to the Holy Land, the land where Jesus walked. And we were talking about that room there that they think is the one that Jesus had. And really not that relevant. It's just that it happened, whether it was in that room or another one. He was with his followers one last time for what we now refer to as the Last Supper. Let's face it, all of us will have one of those one of these days. We won't know when it is, more than likely, but we'll have a Last Supper. The death rate here on earth is 100%. We will not survive this. Unless Jesus returns while we're alive, we will all die. Well, he's about to die, and he knows it. And he's actually told them repeatedly he will leave them, but they're not listening. And I really can't blame them, because if your best friend told you they were about to leave, you would try to talk them out of it. You would try to do anything you could to keep them from going. So here he is with the fellas, and they're having this annual dinner. They had it every year, still having it. And same elements, celebrating freedom, the Passover. And he has some words for them, because they're going to need these words in the coming days. Because they have no idea of what's about to happen. And let's face it, they have reason to be worried. As far as we know, 11 of them were martyred. They died very painful, cruel deaths. So they have reason to be fearful. And apparently they were, because he addresses them that way with these words that transcend the ages. They're for us now. Because no doubt, a group this size, probably some of you came in here troubled. So here are the words of Jesus for you. Let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God? Then believe in me also, he said. In my Father's house are many rooms or mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again. Now already, Jesus has mentioned heaven as a place. It's a house. It has rooms or mansions. He wanted us, earthbound humans, to know that heaven is really a place and that you can go there. He assumed that we were smart enough to know it's a place, or he wouldn't have called it a place. It's actually a more real place than this. This is a beautiful place, but honestly, one of these days this place won't be here, and neither will you. Heaven, it's eternal. So that's where he's going. And he's telling them he's going. And he's told them repeatedly. You know where I'm going, he said right after that. And you know how to get there, because he told them. But they weren't paying attention, obviously, because Thomas, wouldn't it be Thomas, stands up at the table and says, we don't know where you're going, and we don't know how to He's told us that He's going to leave. He's going to build them better. We don't know where you're going, and we don't know how to get there. So perhaps you come into St. James tonight, and your question would be, how do I get to heaven? Which I think is an awesome question. It's one of the greatest questions of all time. And Jesus answered that question with these words. How do I get to heaven? He said, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. So if you want to go to heaven, you're going to have to go through Jesus. He is the way. If you're looking for truth, and I hope you are, He is the truth. If you're looking for a better life now, an eternal life someday, He is the life, the way, the truth, and the life. If you want to go to the Father, you're going to have to go through Christ. I found this out the hard way. I got killed on the way to church. 25 years ago, right now, I was in a hospital bed in Houston, and I was never expected to leave. Well, I didn't expect to live first, but then I wasn't expected to leave the hospital bed. No one gave me any chance for ever having that happen. I was on my way to church when this happened. I left the pastor's conference, kind of like the one we were having at lunch today. And I got in my car and I'm headed to my church on a Wednesday night. And it was a Wednesday. And in my church, the tradition was to have a Wednesday night Bible study, service, a prayer time, really. And so I was on my way to conduct that service when this happened. It can happen anytime, you know. That's how death is. So I'm driving across a rural bridge, having left the conference center in the middle of nowhere, about 130 miles from my church. I hadn't been out of the gates of the conference center for 10 minutes when I'm crossing a bridge, and I'm going in a direction I've never gone before. I just did it out of curiosity. I went that way because I'd never been that way before, and on the map it looked like it was just as close to go that way. I'm kind of a curious person by nature. If I haven't gone to a place, I'll go there just to see what it's like. Maybe that's why you're here tonight. You heard they had a dead guy down at St. James, and you wanted to see him. I think curiosity is a great idea. I mean, isn't that a good reason to go to church? Curiosity? Because you'll get answers to your questions every time you come here. Well, I went that way. If you go that way, you have to cross an old bridge. I was on this bridge about a year and a half ago with a guy named Bob Woodruff from ABC News. Nightline was doing a series of stories called Beyond Belief. And Bob Woodruff, who at one time was the anchor for the World News Tonight after Peter Jennings, went to Iraq to cover a story, and while he was there, an IED blew up beside him and just took off his face, just the complete side of his head. So Bob wanted to meet on the bridge and talk about heaven, which we did. Well, that day I'm crossing the bridge, and Bob and I were standing in exactly the same place, the exact spot on that bridge, that old World War I bridge. And it's still there. It's not in use anymore because they built a nice 4-lane highway beside it. But the bridge remains because it is a memorial bridge to the men and women who served in that war. So we're there. He and I are standing right there looking over the railing into the water below. That day I was driving my car to church. It's raining, it's cold, it's a miserable day, but I'm on my way to church, so I'm not really thinking about the weather. I'm focused on getting back home, getting to the church, and leading a Bible study, and then going home after church to see my family. Well, I will probably have seen them at church, but in church sometimes you're running in this direction and they're running in another. So I was looking forward to being home after a 3-day conference. Coming in the opposite direction that rainy morning was an 18-wheeler. And it's flat going on the bridge in this direction, but from the other end, the highway is fairly steep after you exit the bridge. Well, there was an 18-wheeler, a tractor-trailer truck coming down onto the bridge from that steep embankment. A car pulled out at the last minute in front of him, so even though he was driving about 25 miles an hour over the speed limit, he had to make a decision and fast, because there's no way he can stop this massive truck going downhill that fast. There's no way he can avoid hitting that car. So his decision is hit the car and hope it's for the best, or go around the car and hope no one's coming down the bridge because he can't see down the bridge. He's in a big cab of a truck way up here, and there's a superstructure of a bridge blocking his view. So in a split second, he goes around the car, and of course he hits me head on. He just runs over my car and just crushes the car and shoves it against the railing of the bridge. There's some pictures of it in the book, and I'm not doing justice, but it's pretty bad. And so he swerved back over after he ran over my car and hit 2 more cars. So it's a 4-vehicle pileup on the Trinity River Bridge. Really horrific accident. It is a very isolated and rural area. It took a long time for police and ambulances to arrive, and they did. And they started examining all the victims. And it actually turned out to be a lot better than they thought. Because even though these vehicles were just all demolished, no one else was hurt. The truck driver wasn't hurt, and that's not too surprising. He was weighing that cab above everything. But the drivers of the other 2 cars were not hurt. So they're all kind of examined, treated, and released, which meant that the 4 paramedics, because there were 4 ambulances dispatched to the bridge, now worked on me, because anyone could have seen that I was not okay. Quite the contrary, there were pieces of me lying on the bridge beside my car. So they're trying everything to save me. They're trying everything to, first of all, save me, and then when they discover I'm not salvageable, try to revive me, try to resuscitate me, try to bring me back. And I'm told by those paramedics that they did things they never even tried before because there was nothing to lose except my life. I was a fatality. And they were unsuccessful in all their efforts. So I was pronounced dead by 4 paramedics on the bridge. Which always brings up an interesting question. We talked about it this morning, and it's the same question now. If I was dead on the bridge, what am I doing in Missouri? And I ask you the same question. What are you doing? I mean, it matters. At this juncture of your life, no matter how old you are, what your age is, what do you have to show for your life up to this moment in time? I promise you will come in. Well, someone got a tarp out of one of the police cars and covered up the body so nobody could see it. Obviously, all the windows are gone in the car. It's just a horrific wreck, and this body is lying there. It's just torn apart. So they covered me up so nobody would see it. They're waiting for the coroner, because anytime you have a fatality like this, you have to do an investigation. They have to decide who's responsible for the death. And they're having trouble getting the coroner out to the bridge that morning because apparently there were other accidents in that area. So we're in line, which means they can't move me until the coroner shows up and does the proper paperwork, which means that now on this 2-lane bridge, traffic is backing up for miles in both directions. It's the only highway across the lake, so there's nowhere to go. Back behind me are many of the same pastors that I have just attended the conference with. And one of those pastors was a gentleman named Dick Honorary. His church was north of Houston, mine was south of Houston. Without knowing it, we're on the same highway on the way to do the same thing on Wednesday night. Dick Honorary, probably out of curiosity also, abandons his car. He and his wife, Anita, walk up to this bridge, down the long bridge. They see all the wreckage in front of them. And when they get close enough, they see that it's awful. And Dick Honorary walks to the policeman in charge and says, Officer, I am a pastor. I see there's been an awful wreck here. I would be honored to pray for the victims. Is there anyone I can pray for? And the policeman, very nice fellow, said, no, there's no one to pray for. Everyone else is okay. The truck driver and the drivers of those 2 cars are fine. They actually left. The man in the red car, he's dead. He didn't make it. And when the policeman said that, Dick Honorary said something happened to him that he couldn't remember happening before quite the same way. God spoke to him verbally. Just said something out loud. No one else heard it but Dick did. And here's what God said to Dick Honorary on the bridge. Pray for the man in the red car. Pray for the man on the red car. Well, he didn't know the man on the red car. Obviously, it was me. And frankly, you wouldn't have known me either if you'd known it. Because I was so horribly disfigured. My own family wouldn't have known me. Dick says when he came up onto the scene, there were those pieces of me on the bridge. And so he knew it was awful. And the policeman said, he's dead, there's no way to pray for him. Well, God told me to pray for him. Dick said. God told me to pray for him. Well, all right. Go ahead and pray if you want. Well, no, sir, I want to hold him. I want to touch him. I want to put my hand on him and pray for him. No, sir, you cannot do that. It's too, the wreckage is dangerous. See all the twisted metal and broken glass? If you go over there, you could be a victim yourself. You can't go over there. But sir, I've got to go over there. God's told me to pray. I do think God is doing a lot more talking than we are listening. This is one of those cases where God was talking and the man was listening. So he eventually gets permission and gets in the wreckage of the car, and he examines it because he has a medical background. He discovers the only thing I didn't break in the accident was my right arm. This is it. The only thing I didn't break. My son, who used to travel with me, said that I didn't break my right arm so I could sign books, but I don't think it's true. I don't think so. Dick on a record reaches between the two front seats. The body is still strapped in. I'm impaled on the steering wheel. And he knows I didn't break my right arm because he examined me. So he puts his hand on my right shoulder. He is now covered up with the same tarp. He is in the dark with me, praying over my dead body. Because God's told him. He's not the only one praying by this time, because obviously the authorities had searched the body to try to find out who I was. I couldn't speak for myself, so they were trying to notify my family. And they found my identification, and they called my home, and nobody was there. It was a Wednesday morning. My wife had decided at the last minute not to go with me on this trip. She was a school teacher. She taught for 34 years. It's hard to believe I'm married to someone who's retired. It's just kind of, I'm married to a grandmother. How did that happen? I think that makes me a grandfather. I think that's pretty good. It is. Eva taught school for 34 years. She was at school that morning teaching because it was the beginning of a new semester and she had several new students and she did not want to miss a few days of school at the beginning of the semester, getting to know students if they would have had a substitute. So she decided Sunday night not to go in the car. She would have been in the seat right beside me. She was at school, and I shared this morning, she is the hero of the story, and I'm not. Eva is the one who took care of our 3 children. Eva is the one who kept teaching so we could have some insurance. Eva is the one who would sleep on a cot beside me in the hospital day in and day out. She is the one who emptied bedpans and balanced the checkbook. Eva's new book, A Walk Through the Dark, will be out July 17th. If you'd like to see the cover of it, it's back there on the book table. We don't obviously have the book, but you can see what it's going to look like, A Walk Through the Dark. It's going to be enormously helpful to a lot of people trying to figure out how to get through a dark night, a painful experience, caregivers, people who've experienced great loss. I'm so excited about our book. Eva was in school that morning teaching. I can only imagine what it must have been like when that teacher's aide stuck her head in my wife's classroom and said, "Mrs. Piper, you're wanted in the office." But I'm teaching right now. I'm going to class full of students. I can't wait. I'll watch your students. You're wanted in the office. You need to go immediately. She's making that long walk, and it was a long walk from her room down to the office, wondering why she's being pulled out of her classroom. What are our children in trouble? Does the parent need to see her immediately? What's going on? She walked in that room, and the principal walked around his desk and put his arm around her and said, "Eva, I'm afraid I have some very bad news. God has been in a terrible accident. We do not know what's happened yet, but we're told it's bad. And we're going to try to get you some information as soon as we can." And her life would never be the same again.
The church is called because they found my business card in the wallet since they couldn't reach anybody in my home, and they're told about the accident. They're not told that I'm dead. And the church office knows I'm on the way there. So they're expecting me in just an hour or two. And now they're being told I'm not coming. I've been in a bad accident. Not that I'm dead, because my family has not been notified yet. They have to be notified first. So all the church knows is I've been in a terrible accident. And in just a matter of a minute or two after being notified, they begin to pray. And someone in the church office says, we can't just pray ourselves. We've got to start calling every church in the phone book. It doesn't matter what kind of church they are. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter where they are. We've got to call. And they just started ripping up pages of the Houston phone book, and everybody started calling churches. And this spread quickly. Bad news travels fast. And in a very short period of time, many thousands of people were praying for me. Coast to coast. Foreign countries. People were praying for the man in the red car who's been in an accident on his way to church. And they're being lifted up, all these petitions to the throne of God. I don't know they're praying because I am at the throne of God. And I'm having a glorious time. Had I known they were praying down here, I would have told them to stop. Because if you've been there, you don't want to be here. So this prayer is all just being lifted up to the throne of God. This goes on for an hour and a half. And the reason we know this is because the accident happened at exactly 11:45 a.m. Police traffic report. 11:45 a.m. Collision. It is now 1:15 in the afternoon, 90 minutes after the wreck. An hour and a half has passed. People are praying all over the world who don't know I'm dead. One man who does know that I'm dead is in the car praying over the body under a tarp in the dark. And he's alternating verbal prayers, which we just experienced, with musical prayers, which we often call hymns. He's singing an old one, What a Friend We Have in Jesus. A marvelous old song. A gentleman who grew up in Ireland was engaged to be married, and the day before he was to be married, his fiancée and he made a pact that they would have a picnic beside the river, and then the next day they would see each other at the wedding. On the way to that picnic, she was thrown from the horse and killed. He was so devastated by this, he just didn't feel like he could ever fall in love again. Years passed, and he did. And before that lady and the two of them could be married, she developed scarlet fever and died. He left Ireland and moved to Canada. He just didn't think he could stay there anymore. And so he began a new life, doing good deeds for other people. And that's the way he kind of came to grips with his immense losses. Then he received word from Ireland that his mother was very near death. Not knowing whether he could get back to Ireland before she passed, he sat down and wrote a poem dedicated to her. That poem is a poem that we now know as What a Friend We Have in Jesus. That day in the car, Nick on record was singing that song over my dead body, holding on my right shoulder under the tarp in the dark. He's been under there for about an hour and a half. People are praying around the world suddenly that morning under the tarp in the dark. As he sang that song over my body, I began to sing it with him. And he exited the car briskly. Something we probably know. Some faster than others. I wouldn't have been out very fast. I can't move very fast. He got out of the car, he ran over to the policeman that he really pleaded with to get in the car, and he said, "Officer, the dead man is singing." It's really good. In fact, 3 of the 4 ambulances that were on the bridge had already left. The last one was packed. It was turning around and leaving. They had a vehicle standing by to take away the body. It wasn't an ambulance. So Dick has got to convince that one last ambulance, and they will not hear of it. I mean, their words were, and they weren't being neglectful. That was the truth. They said to him, "Sir, you seem very sincere, but not only is he dead, he's been dead a long time. You just think you hear him sing." So Dick walked around and stood in front of the ambulance and yelled out loud for everybody on the bridge to hear it, more them than the driver. If you leave here without him in the back of that ambulance, I'm going to lie down here on the bridge and you're going to have to run over me. Because I'm not leaving until you check on me. What a guy. So they said, all right, okay, we'll go check it. So they went and lifted up the tarp and they found out it was a lie. Down in Texas, they say, sure enough, I was lying. I suspect there's places in Missouri that say that too. My parents, my wife's parents are from West Plains. I know they say sure enough, I heard them say. Well, they have to figure out how to get me out of the car. It's bad. I'm actually crushed in the car. It's wrapped around me. They did not have equipment for removing a living person on the bridge because I had not been alive. So they had to order that from town 45 miles away. It eventually arrived, and they, as best they could, they dismantled the car, actually tore it apart, sawed the roof off of it, and as close as they could, they tried to get me in one piece onto the gurney, and they did. I remember lying flat on my back on that gurney and hearing all the glass under the boots of the people walking around the bridge, and looking up, as I was on my back, at the girders of the bridge, and having rain fall on my face, and thinking to myself, something bad has happened here. And whatever it is, I'm in. Didn't feel a thing. They took me to a clinic 15 miles away. They didn't even take me out of the ambulance there. There was nothing they could do for me. They were not equipped to deal with that. They took me to a regional hospital 35 miles away. There they stabilized me, even though I was in grave condition. And they're making arrangements now to try to transport me to the nearest level 1 trauma center, which is Memorial Hermann Hospital in Houston. That's 85 miles. They wanted to airlift me, but the weather did not permit the helicopter to take off from the landings that day. So I found myself in the back of an ambulance on my way to Houston. In the back of that ambulance, where everything began to come into focus for me, I had so many broken bones and open gaping wounds. I didn't know you could hurt like that. I said. I said to the young paramedic that was taking care of me in the back of that ambulance, weaving in and out of traffic, the siren is blaring, we're on the shoulder sometimes trying to get around cars. It was just a nightmare. And I felt every bump on the road. But more than felt it, it was just horrendous. I said to him through my oxygen mask, sir, is there any way you could give me something for pain, please? And he looked down at me, of course he was sitting above me, and he said, Mr. Piper, I can't give you anything else for pain. If I give you anything else for pain, you'll probably just pass out. That's kind of what I'm shooting for. I mean, just never want to be unconscious. I mean, just out. I did. He was following orders, because that's what the doctors in Houston had told him. They were afraid if I lost consciousness in the ambulance, they wouldn't be able to get me. We drove along a little further, and I kept hearing these horrifying screams in the ambulance, blood curdles. So, making an effort one more time with my oxygen mask, I said to him, I'm sorry to bother you again, but is there any way you can make those people stop screaming? It's really disturbing. This time, this young paramedic, fantastic young man, put his hand on my shoulder, the only thing I didn't break, and he looked down at me with tears in his eyes. It's amazing what they see, but it affects them. He looked down at me and said, Mr. Piper, I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but beside the driver and me, there's no one else in the ambulance. You're screaming. You're the one who's screaming. Well, I was a 38-year-old pastor on his way to church to lead a Bible study. Now I'm in the back of an ambulance, screaming, and I don't even know it's me. I assure you, I've never been more frightened in my life than I was at that moment. Because I knew from then on, I was never going to be the same. Told you the accident happened at 11:45. I arrived in the emergency room at Memorial Hermann Hospital in Houston at 6:15. 6.5 hours after the wreck. From that night forward, I would be in the hospital bed for 13 months. I would have 34 operations back together. From head to toe. We shared earlier today that two things in particular emerged very quickly. Two facts, two revelations, two incredible things that rang through to this very night. Here we go. Number one, I do believe that God answers prayer. And number two, I do believe that God is still in the miracle business in the 21st century. And I really both of those things. I had nothing to do with my survival. Like I said, if I had a choice, I would have stayed dead. You saw what I came back to. You wouldn't want to live there. I promise you, you wouldn't want to live there. I wouldn't wish it on you. What a night. Over to the little book of James, chapter 5. And I think this is so telling about the Bible. You know, I think people who feel like they're modern and enlightened have a tendency to make light of the Bible. That it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter anymore. It just doesn't. The stories in there are outdated. Well, if you're looking for relevance, how about this question from James chapter 5? Is any one of you in trouble? How about that for relevance? This is in the Bible. Is anyone? You know what it says right after that? Then he should pray. So God's way of dealing with us is talking to him. And he does want to hear from us. But it's not always asking for things. It's having a conversation with God. One of my favorite musicals is Fiddler on the Roof. And the reason I like it is because Tevye is having a constant conversation with God. He's the milkman, so he's walking along, delivering his milk, he's talking to God. He's out in the field, he's talking to God. He's with his family, he kind of does an aside to God. He's always talking to God. His life is a conversation with God. Wow. I think that works. I told everybody earlier today about my dad. My dad was an American hero. My dad served in the U.S. Army in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He had a chest full of them. They call it fruit salad in the military. He just had a chest full of them. He was one tough character. A drill sergeant. He was a tough character. And he drilled us. My brother's a